With World War III, a failing economy, and a rising global tyranny upon us, it is safe to say that the 2024 US presidential election could make or break America's future. One candidate has skyrocketed in popularity. Vivek Ramaswamy. He is quick-witted, sensible, intelligent, charismatic, and seems to love the spotlight.
Listen, now that everybody's gotten their memorized, pre-prepared slogans out of the way, we can actually have a real discussion now.
Maybe even a little too much.
We're just gonna have some fun tonight.
Some are questioning his true intentions, while others are accusing him of being a Donald Trump plant. So the question is, who is the real Vivek Ramaswamy?
The guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here.
Come on, give me a hug. Give me a hug just like you did to Obama.
Here we are, just months after the pandemic was deemed officially over. But now, Pandemic 2.0 is making headlines. This guy is now saying that masks
actually do work.
Our president is back in a mask. We have a lot of ominous predictions coming from the most influential people in the world.
You say the next pandemic, there will be another pandemic.
Absolutely.
The next booster is right around the corner. And now, all of a sudden, a former pharmaceutical CEO comes out of nowhere, saying all the things that Republicans want to hear. It's interesting that the one group of people that were vehemently against what they thought was a biomedical tyranny are now suddenly falling in love with a guy who was literally a big pharma billionaire during the pandemic. I'm not saying that there is something nefarious afoot, but if nothing else, it is worth an investigation. So let's investigate. These investigations, by the way, take time and money. And unlike Vivek Ramaswamy, we are not billionaire pharma bros. So if you enjoy our work, please consider checking out our merch. The link is in the description. Now back to the video. Vivek Ganapathy Ramaswamy was born August 9th, 1985. He is a billionaire entrepreneur and Republican presidential candidate. He first gained notoriety in the alternative media space last year with his headstrong, unscripted, intellectual approach to politics.
And that's why I'm proud to say tonight that I am running for United States president.
However, he hit mainstream American audiences by capturing the attention of the first Republican debate stage by doing this.
So first, let me just address a question that is on everybody's mind at home tonight. Who the heck is this skinny guy with a funny last name, and what the heck is he doing in the middle of this debate stage?
That line sounds familiar.
The hope of a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too.
Okay, perhaps he's not the unscripted political genius that everyone seems to think he is. So let's rewind the clocks and take a look at where Vivek got his start.
I've been racing my entire high school career. But now when we're finally crossing the finish line, I wish I could have stopped just a little earlier and caught a breath of the fresh air.
The first thread that we must run down is Vivek's interactions with the Soros family. In 2010, 24-year-old Vivek Ramaswamy received a scholarship from the Soros family for $50,000. But it wasn't from George Soros. It was from Paul and Daisy Soros. Paul, aka the invisible Soros, is now long dead. Still, many are accusing Ramaswamy of being financially corrupted by this, to which Ramaswamy claims,
Were there strings attached? No, there weren't.
he even went as far as to say that anyone in his position should take the money in this scenario, stating that not doing so would be so unwise and so unintelligent that they would not be fit to run for office.
If I had turned down that scholarship back then, that would have been so foolish that anybody that foolish probably should have no place anywhere near the White House doing trade deals on behalf of this country.
He also claimed that he needed the money for law school at the time.
When I didn't have the money and it was a merit scholarship.
But Vivek did have the money. In fact, he was almost a millionaire at this point in his life, so he definitely had the money. This isn't damning per se, but he's definitely not being honest, to say the least. When confronted about this by political commentator Anomaly,
He's dead now. It's like,
You asked me.
Vivek doubled down, saying to check his tax returns.
We published 20 years of tax returns.
Well, we did check his tax returns. In 2011, the year he received the Soros scholarship, he made well over $2 million. Vivek says that he made that money after he had already accepted the scholarship. But in the 3 years prior, he made well over $1 million. And by the time he applied for the scholarship, he had already earned well over $500,000. Vivek also tried to cover up his Soros connection by paying for it to be erased from his Wikipedia page.
I practice what I preach. I believe in total transparency.
It's kind of interesting that he paid for someone to edit his Wikipedia page, but he left up this tweet for free. This might be because he actually stands by Soros' statement here.
Probably doesn't sound good, but you know what? In that narrow instance, I actually do stand by it because I think Xi Jinping is the greatest threat that we face, and we got to wake up to it.
On one hand, I guess it's true that an open society would be preferable to whatever Xi Jinping wants for the US. That being said, it's still strange to praise Soros for this. The tweet still seems like Vivek is in favor of the open society that George Soros is vying for. Of all the possible futures that America can have, I really hope that these aren't the only two options. Vivek is also still touted on Paul Soros' website. Apparently, he didn't pay for that to be removed either. And it was through this foundation that Vivek got connected to his business partner, a critical player in the success of the billionaire's career. While Vivek claims that his connection to the Soros family has no strings attached, it definitely proved to be a very lucrative connection for him.
And what we're doing that's different, and I see as an opportunity to build a lasting big pharma in its own right, is to make that strategy systematic across disease areas. You have the big pharma companies focusing on large-scale unmet medical needs. Our view is if the science supports it, if there's a major unmet medical need where we can make a difference, we're in that game.
We just got scammed by this industry. And by extension, we got scammed by the Republican Party, Democratic Party, and the media. Ironic how Republicans go from booing Trump over this.
Take the vaccines, I did it, it's good, take the vaccines. But no, that's okay, that's all right.
To falling in love with this.
Tell me why Glaxo kind of wrote this drug off and yet you have such great hopes for it.
So I obviously can't speak for other companies other than Axovan, but what I can tell you is that RVT-101 is a unique drug that we actually think could help millions of patients with Alzheimer's disease.
The drug he was selling in this clip was a 4 times failed Alzheimer's drug, which he bought from another pharmaceutical company. Unsurprisingly, the drug failed in his hands too, and his company's stock price plunged, losing 75% of its value in a single day, leaving his investors holding the bag. Vivek recently addressed these criticisms too.
And like 99.7% of drugs that have ever been tested for Alzheimer's, thousands of other drugs, mine was one of the many that also didn't work. Now, the mythology is somehow that I made money off this failure. That's wrong. My company, Roivant, set up a subsidiary, Axovan, that Roivant could have sold shares in, that I could have sold shares in before that failure. We didn't. In fact, many people would call that honorable.
What's certain is that Vivek has a charismatic way of speaking that would attract the attention of any investor. And he applies the same charisma to positions that would benefit his pharmaceutical company, but then flip-flops when he needs it to benefit his political campaign. On July 9th, 2020, Vivek tweeted out that it puzzles him how conservatives aren't taking personal responsibility by wearing masks. Then on January 10th, 2022, Vivek wrote this article in which he said that the most important step in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic was the distribution of vaccines. 2 convenient takes to have when you are literally doing deals with NIH and handing out vaccines.
That study is actually starting patient dosing approximately as we speak right now. It's rolling out imminently, if not now.
To be fair, Vivek succeeded this point, claiming that he didn't get everything right during the pandemic, and to his credit, no other politician did either.
Every Republican politician has made some cringeworthy statements about COVID and should be held to account for it.
Right.
For my part, I'm willing to be man enough to actually say it, and I wish that other people should too.
But he justified his tweet shaming anti-mask conservatives by saying his anti-government instincts took over.
My anti-government instincts got the better of me. Because I don't know if you all remember this, but back in March, April 2020, when I put that tweet out, that was in response to the government.
But Vivek is just wrong here. It wasn't April when he tweeted this. It was July. 3 months into the government's push for masks. So there was nothing anti-government about Vivek's stance at all. And where was this anti-government instinct during the rest of the draconian measures? It's also worth noting that Vivek paid to have his role in the Ohio's COVID-19 response team also removed from his Wikipedia page. So was that your libertarian instinct to censor the internet as well?
Transparency is important.
But the pharmaceutical industry isn't the only corrupt institution that Vivek is connected to. Many are also wondering why Vivek was placed upon the World Economic Forum's website, the organization which wants to implement the Great Reset upon the world. See here for a video on that, by the way.
On August 1st, Fox News reported that you settled a lawsuit with the World Economic Forum after they failed to remove your name from its 2021 list of young global leaders, even though you declined the nomination. And what are your ties to the organization, if any?
Oh, so the ties to the organization are none.
According to Vivek, the WEF's nominations are done without the consent of the nominees, hence Vivek's lawsuit against them. But the WEF is just one of many corrupt organizations which Vivek's entangled with. Next on the list is BlackRock. Vivek is very outspoken against ESG, DEI, BlackRock, Vanguard, etc. But ironically, the major shareholders in his company, Roivant, consist of Morgan Stanley, Viking Global, and BlackRock, institutions which share the values that he opposes. It is true, however, that you, as the owner of a public company, don't choose your shareholders. That is something that Vivek is very outspoken about, and it's one of his main points of emphasis in his campaign. Another point of emphasis throughout his campaign has been his unabashed support for former President Donald Trump.
If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
But this support might not be exactly what it seems.
Regarding January 6th, there were some people that felt that you flip-flopped on your messaging. And Rogan, you were one of the people that felt this way.
Yeah, so I started to dig a little deeper on Twitter, and I came across some passages from your book. It talks about January 6th, and it says, "It was a dark day for democracy. The loser of the last election refused to concede the race, claimed the election was stolen, raised hundreds of millions of dollars from loyal supporters, and is considering running for executive office." I'm referring, of course, to Donald Trump. Do you think that the 2020 election was fair? Do you think that Joe Biden got the most votes in American history, or do you think 2020 was rigged?
So I'll answer that. I think 2020 was rigged specifically by big tech. That passage has now been floating around Twitter. I'd encourage you to read the book, or at least even the chapter that came from. You read that chapter and you read that book, it's easy for someone to airlift something out of Nation of Victims without reading the whole book. It was literally a satirical chapter that started with those words that someone had used against Donald Trump, with Stacey Abrams as the punchline.
Any viewer who naively stumbles across this interview would easily walk away thinking that Vivek got the better of the exchange. I mean, after all, DC Drano and Candace Owens both failed to do their due diligence before regurgitating an out-of-context quote floating around on Twitter. But having read his book, he in fact does call Donald Trump out for claiming a stolen election. He even says that Trump's claims are just as disappointing and baseless as Stacey Abrams. Vivek claims that his writing was satirical in the interview, but that's just not entirely true. The whole section criticizes former President Donald Trump for his beliefs. He even made the claim more clear and concise in the following paragraphs by quoting the government's official stance, which said, "The November 3rd election was the most secure in American history." These statements stand in stark contrast to current sentiments expressed by Vivek.
The form of election interference that I think changed the outcome of the election was big tech's interference. I believe that there was ballot and election fraud. I think we have clear evidence of that.
So to be clear, he does actually believe that there is both election interference from big tech and ballot fraud, a position which he shamed in his book, then misrepresented to both Candace and DC Drano. A change of opinion is obviously fine, but why be dishonest now about his views expressed in his book? The section of his book that I referenced is titled Sore Losers, where he makes the overt claim that not only was the election free and fair, but that conservatives have their own victim complexes. Vivek states that the worst victimhood that afflicts modern conservatives is their budding belief system that any election they lose must have been stolen. Why shame conservatives that hold this position, then with extremely convenient timing, turn around and hold them yourself?
I, based on everything I've seen, believe there was absolutely ballot fraud.
Vivek also flip-flopped on the January 6th incident. Here's his tweet saying that what Donald Trump did was downright abhorrent. And here's him a couple years later calling it political prosecution.
These are politicized persecutions through prosecution.
Again, changing your opinion is okay, but Vivek's timing is just awfully convenient. There are a few possibilities as to what Vivek's true intentions are. He could just want the best for America, or he could be looking for notoriety and fame. In an ABC article written in August of this year, one of Vivek's former advisors claimed, quote, "It's clear that he's been wanting to be famous for a long time." In that same article, another aide who advised Vivek early on in his campaign said that there was, quote, "frustration among staff early on because Vivek was concerned more about getting his podcast, The Vivek Show, off the ground, rather than strategizing around how to win the party's nomination." This sounds like someone who is seeking a path to stardom and found an avenue to do so, not someone who is trying to win a presidency for the betterment of the country. This theory makes sense with another claim that's been floating around too. A leaked 2023 phone call in which Vivek announced his bid for the White House paints an interesting picture. It's possible that Vivek is just trying to draw attention away from presidential candidate Ron DeSantis in an attempt to secure the presidency for Trump. ABC cited several sources that back up this claim. Apparently, leading up to his presidential announcement, Vivek told several conservative figures that if he ran, it could stop DeSantis from running or impact his viability as a candidate.
I think Ron DeSantis is sloppy.
That makes it seem like he was more focused on taking DeSantis down than actually winning the race himself, which would be very beneficial for Trump. Vivek is also probably the only Republican candidate that Trump really hasn't attacked yet. And that's saying something.
Ron DeSanctimonious.
That could be because Trump knows Vivek is drawing votes away from DeSantis. Or perhaps they're secretly working together. Does Vivek really want to be the leader of the free world? Is he a Trump plant? Or does he really just love the spotlight? What do you think?